Millions of viewers watched the acid splash across her face on the live stream, but no one knew it was just a chemical stunt designed to create fake burns. This is the story of how a perfectly performed victim sent an innocent man to prison, turning a fabricated tragedy into her finest hour. Seattle wasn't just crying, it was drowning. The ocean fell from the sky, shattering against concrete, glass, and steel, turning the streets into blurred watercolors of neon and filth. Raindrops drummed against the panoramic window on the 25th floor of the elite Vantage Point complex, but inside, a sterile, perfect silence reigned, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioner. In the center of the room, surrounded by a halo of 3 ring lights, sat Emily. Through the lens of her iPhone 15 Pro Max, she looked like a broken angel. The lighting was positioned to highlight the wet sheen in her blue eyes while concealing the microscopic lines of fatigue at the corners of her mouth. She wore a stretched-out, oversized T-shirt, a carefully curated element of the girl-next-door-in-trouble look. I just don't know what to do, guys," she whispered, her voice trembling with perfect, Oscar-worthy precision. "It's been going on for a week, every single night." In the bottom right corner of her smartphone screen, comments rushed by in a frantic torrent. Hearts, crying emojis, words of support. Emily saw them, but her brain, cold and calculating as a processor, filtered out the emotions, retaining only the metrics. Engagement was growing, reach was breaking records. Suddenly, a notification popped up at the top of the screen. Black banner, white text. Unknown. You think the screen will protect you. You will pay for what you did. Emily gasped convulsively, bringing her hand to her mouth. "Did you see that?" she sobbed, leaning so close to the camera that the autofocus wavered for a second. "Oh God, he's texting again." Another message. "Your pretty face is going to melt soon. I will wipe that smile off with acid." The stream exploded. Subscribers demanded someone call the police, offered to come over with baseball bats, and cursed the anonymous stalker. Emily cried, and a large tear, refracting the light of the ring lamp, rolled down her cheek at the exact moment the viewer count crossed 50,000. "I'm scared to leave the house," she whispered, and ended the broadcast. As soon as the screen went dark, Emily straightened up. Her shoulders relaxed, and the grimace of terror vanished instantly, replaced by an expression of bored indifference. She took a tissue and carefully dabbed away the tear so not to ruin her foundation, then reached for a laptop sitting just out of frame in the camera's blind spot. It was an old, battered ThinkPad with no webcam or microphone, its ports taped over. The Onion logo of the Tor browser glowed on the screen. Next to it, a terminal window was open with a script running. Emily pressed Alt-Tab. On the black background of a messenger using end-to-end encryption hung the history of her correspondence with herself. The Onion route service reliably hid her IP address, bouncing data packets through nodes in Romania, Panama, and Singapore before returning them to Seattle, right back to her own smartphone. Emily typed the next message on the laptop, her fingers flying with frightening speed. "Tomorrow, parking lot, you can't hide." She hit enter. A second later, her iPhone chimed. Emily chuckled with satisfaction, took a screenshot of the threat, and set the phone aside. "Scene 1, take 1, she said quietly to the empty apartment. "Cut." She walked to the window. Below, in the labyrinth of streets, thousands of people lived their small lives, believing what they saw on their screens. Emily despised them for that belief. But she despised Mark most of all. He was smart, too smart. He might have understood. But now his intellect would become a tool in her masterpiece. The underground parking garage of the Titanium Sports Club resembled a crypt from the industrial age. Gray concrete, the drone of ventilation, the smell of dampness and exhaust fumes. Fluorescent lights flickered, creating a strobe effect that made the head spin. Emily stepped out of the elevator. She was wearing a heavy leather biker jacket, vintage, bought specifically for this evening, thick buffalo leather. Beneath the jacket were several layers of synthetic fabric. Her hoodie was pulled up over her head. She stopped by her car, a white Audi Q8. She looked around. Empty. The surveillance cameras on this level, as she knew, thanks to Kevin, had a blind spot right in this sector by support pillar B4. Emily took out her phone, turned on the voice recorder. "I'm walking to the car," she whispered for the recording. "I think I heard footsteps. Who's there?" She placed the phone on the hood, camera facing the aisle, but angled so the shot looked accidental and tilted. Then, from the inner pocket of her jacket, she extracted a glass vial with a ground glass stopper. Inside splashed a liquid of a sinister yellowish hue. It wasn't pure sulfuric acid. Emily wasn't suicidal. She had spent 2 weeks studying chemistry on forums. The mixture was a complex chemical cocktail, a recipe she found in a closed section of the darknet. It was a special theatrical reagent with a caustic base. It caused instant redness and burning, ruined clothing, but didn't inflict deep tissue damage. The visual effect was scarier than the actual harm. She took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. She couldn't just pour it. There needed to be a struggle. There needed to be dynamics. Emily spun around sharply toward an invisible opponent. "No, get back!" she screamed, and the echo of her voice bounced off the concrete walls. She swung her arm, miming someone trying to grab her, and with a sharp motion, splashed the contents of the vial on her left shoulder and neck. The liquid hit her skin. The pain was instant and sharp, as if a hot iron had been pressed against her neck. But Emily didn't just scream. She performed the scream. It was a shriek of animal terror, transitioning into a wheeze. "Ah, God!" The liquid hissed on the jacket. The material began to smoke, spreading an acrid smell. The thick substance ran down, mixing with the melting fabric and creating a gruesome, terrifyingly realistic picture of a chemical burn. Emily fell to her knees, rolling on the dirty concrete, deliberately positioning her left side under the light. "Help! Somebody!" At the far end of the parking lot, a door slammed. The sound of running feet followed. 2 men and a woman, exiting the elevator, froze in horror at the sight of the writhing figure in clouds of chemical vapor. "Ambulance! Call 911!" one of the men yelled, rushing toward her. Through the veil of pain, real but controlled, Emily saw people running up. She grabbed the man by his sleeve with her healthy hand, digging her nails into the fabric. "I saw him," she wheezed, looking straight into the witness's eyes. "I saw his eyes under the mask." "Who, ma'am? Who did you see?" "Mark," she exhaled, before allowing herself to lose consciousness, theatrically but convincingly. "It was Mark!" The phone on the hood continued to record the sound, the hissing of acid, the shouts of people, and the name that the concrete walls now knew. The server room of Core Data Systems was located in the basement of a nondescript office building in the Sodo Industrial District. There were no windows here, only rows of black cabinets with blinking green and blue LEDs. The hum of fans blended into a monotone symphony that calmed Mark. Mark was 28, but he looked older. Dark circles under his eyes, 3-day stubble, the look of a man accustomed to anticipating a blow. He sat in an ergonomic chair surrounded by 3 monitors. On one ran transaction logs, on another was the code for a bank security kernel he was testing, and on the third, the building's perimeter schematic. Mark was paranoid. Friends called it professional deformation, but Mark knew, if you have enemies, paranoia is just preparation. He took a sip of cold coffee. The time was 02:45 a.m. Suddenly, the third monitor flashed red. Alert, perimeter breach, Sector 1, silent alarm. Mark froze. He hadn't pressed the panic button. The system had been triggered by external motion sensors he had installed himself, illegally tapping into the neighboring building's cameras. He brought the image up on the main screen. A black van with no license plates braked at the service entrance. Figures in full tactical gear poured out of it. No flashing lights, no sirens. This wasn't a patrol. This was SWAT. "What the hell?" Mark whispered. His heart skipped a beat, then began pounding in a drum and bass rhythm. His brain switched into survival mode. He didn't know why they were here, but he knew one thing. If SWAT raids a server room at night, they aren't planning to knock and show a warrant. First, they break doors, then ribs, and only then do they ask questions. On the screen, one of the officers attached a charge to the electronic door. Mark spun to his keyboard. His fingers, used to code, flew over the keys. CMD, exec lockdown protocol. Heavy magnetic locks clicked on the inner server room door. That would give him about 40 seconds. He yanked the hard drive from the hot swap slot. It held client data, his insurance, his work. He shoved the drive into his backpack. Boom! The building shuddered. Somewhere in the corridor, the first door was blown. Shouts of police, face down, drifted in, muffled as if underwater. Mark ran to the fire suppression panel. The system used halon, a gas that displaces oxygen to instantly stop electronics from burning. Dangerous for humans if they stay inside, but perfect for creating chaos. He ripped off the seal and slammed the red button. The hiss was deafening. Jets of white gas burst from nozzles on the ceiling. Visibility dropped to 0 in 3 seconds. The temperature in the room plummeted. Mark pulled his sweater collar over his nose, held his breath, and dashed to the far corner, behind rack number 12. There, behind a false floor panel, hid the entrance to a technical ventilation shaft leading to the cooling system on the roof of the adjacent warehouse. He had discovered it 6 months ago while inventorying cables and unlocked the grate just in case. They started sawing through the server room door. Sparks flew into the clouds of halon, creating a surreal light show. Mark squeezed into the narrow passage. Metal chilled his stomach. He crawled, scraping his elbows, hearing heavy tactical boots storming the gas-filled room behind him. "Clear!" someone wheezed through a gas mask. "Target absent! Gas! Masks on!" Mark could no longer hear them. He scrambled up the vertical shaft, fighting a bout of claustrophobia. The main thing was not to stop. Upward to the rain. Mark fell out of the vent housing onto the roof, greedily gulping the cold, wet air. The rain instantly soaked his clothes, washing away the smell of the server room and fear. He slid down the fire escape into the alley, jumped a fence, and blended into the shadows. He walked fast, head down, trying not to run so as not to attract attention. He made it to Pike Street. Here, despite the late hour and the downpour, there was life. Neon reflected in puddles, creating the illusion that the city was burning. Mark looked up. On the corner of a building hung a giant LED screen broadcasting breaking news from a local channel. The image hit him harder than a bullet. On the screen was Emily's face. Half her head was wrapped in bandages, soaked in something yellow and brown. She lay in a hospital bed, weak, destroyed. The chyron at the bottom read, "Instagram star doused with acid, suspect wanted." The shot changed. Mark's photo appeared on the screen. His ID badge photo, sullen, serious. "Police are searching for Mark S., the victim's former partner," the anchor's voice announced. "Emily claims he has been stalking her for months. Witnesses heard her scream his name at the moment of the attack. If you see this individual, do not approach. He may be armed and dangerous." Mark stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. People passed by, hiding under umbrellas. Someone glanced at the screen, then at him. Everything inside him went cold. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. "She did it," raced through his mind. "She actually did it." He remembered their breakup, her cold eyes when he said he was leaving. "You'll regret this, Mark. You have no idea how much." He thought she'd slash his tires, but this was annihilation. His hand reached for his jeans pocket, smartphone, his digital leash, a beacon broadcasting his location right now to every cell tower within a mile radius. He looked at the gadget. Notifications were cascading in. Messages from friends, colleagues, death threats from strangers on social media. His digital life was collapsing in real time. Mark gripped the phone. He walked up to a large metal dumpster that was just being lifted by the mechanical arm of a garbage truck. A second of hesitation. In that device were contacts, photos, access to accounts, his whole life. Mark popped the SIM card slot, snapped the pin-thin plastic with his fingernails, and flicked the pieces into a puddle. Then he wound up and hurled the device itself into the gaping maw of the garbage truck, a second before the compactor crushed down, grinding the city's refuse. The truck moved on with a clank and a rumble. Mark remained standing in the rain. He had no connection, no home, no job. His name now was a curse. He pulled the hood of his wet sweatshirt lower over his eyes. Now he wasn't Mark, the system administrator. Now he was a ghost in a neon labyrinth, and a ghost had only one goal: to find a glitch in the system Emily had built. He turned and, slouching, dissolved into the crowd, walking away from the light of the big screens into the dark alleys of Chinatown. The hunt had begun. The entrance to the International District was marked by a shift in smells. The stench of exhaust gave way to the aroma of fried sesame oil, rotting fish, and ozone. The rain seemed thicker here, shattering against colorful paper lanterns and neon characters that flooded the wet asphalt with acid pink and toxic green light. Mark pulled his hood lower, hiding a face that every dog in Seattle now knew. He wasn't just a fugitive. He was an error in the city's code that the system was trying to delete. The basement of the Red Lotus Gaming Club greeted him with a wall of tobacco smoke and the hum of hundreds of cooling fans. Here, in the gloom, illuminated only by the flicker of monitors, sat dozens of people, from truants skipping school to freelance hackers. No one looked up. Questions weren't asked here. Mark threw a crumpled 20 on the admin counter and silently pointed to the last booth in the corner. The old Chinese man, without even looking at him, tossed a magnetic key onto the desk. Mark collapsed into the chair, feeling adrenaline give way to leaden fatigue. His hand shook as he touched the keyboard. First priority, security. He booted his operating system from the flash drive he always wore around his neck like a talisman. Tails OS. No traces on the hard drive. A second later, he was inside the network, hidden behind a cascade of proxy servers. He needed to hear her voice, not the one currently sobbing on the news, but the one threatening her, the voice of the anonymous stalker. Mark found the audio files Emily had posted online as proof of the terror. "You will pay for what you did." He launched a spectral analyzer. A visualization of the sound wave appeared on the black screen, green peaks and valleys dancing to the rhythm of hate. Mark put on headphones, cutting out the noise of the club. He listened and watched. "Too clean," he whispered with his lips alone. Human speech is imperfect. Micropauses, breaths, barely noticeable changes in pitch when vocal cords tire. On a spectrogram, this looks like noise, but here the lines were mathematically flawless. Intervals between words were too even, perfect compression. Mark zoomed in on a section of the graph at 14 kilohertz. There it was, a characteristic artifact, a microscopic metallic scratch left by a generative neural network when splicing phonemes. 11 labs, Mark stated, or a custom model based on them. It wasn't a human, it was an algorithm trained on his, Mark's voice. He remembered hundreds of voice messages he had sent Emily over 2 years of their relationship. "Love you. Buy milk. I'll be late at work." She had fed them all to the neural network. She had stolen his voice to accuse him with it. Mark began digging deeper. The metadata had been scrubbed, but Emily, for all her genius, was an actress, not an engineer. She used off-the-shelf software to send the threats. He initiated a trace on the packet headers preserved in the messenger cache, which he had cracked via a 0-day vulnerability 6 months ago just out of boredom, but never used until this moment. The digital trail led halfway around the world, hopping from server to server. But Mark was patient. He pruned false paths like a gardener pruning dead branches. And finally, he found the origin point, an IP address not in Russia, not in China. Seattle, the industrial zone in the south, an old warehouse complex on 4th Avenue. Mark wrote the coordinates on his palm with a ballpoint pen. He was about to stand up when he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. On the monitor of the guy next to him, playing a shooter, a news window popped up. Breaking, suspect's phone signal triangulated in the Chinatown area. Mark went cold. He had thrown away his phone, but it seemed the smart street surveillance cameras had already matched his gait and clothing against the database. He had made a rookie mistake. He underestimated the city. Seattle itself was a snitch. The club door crashed open. 2 patrol officers in wet raincoats burst into the room, hands on their holsters. "Everybody stay in your seats. ID check." Mark didn't wait. He kicked his chair over, creating noise, and bolted toward the rear exit leading to the kitchen. "Hey, stop!" one of the cops yelled. Mark flew into a narrow corridor smelling of rancid oil. A cook, crying out in fright, dropped a cleaver. Mark vaulted over sacks of rice and shoulder-checked the back door, tumbling out into a dirty alley. The rain was coming down in sheets here. Mark slipped on the wet cobblestones but kept his balance. Shouts and the stomp of heavy boots could be heard behind him. He looked up. A fire escape, rusty but sturdy, hung a meter above his head. He jumped, grabbing the cold metal. A pull. His muscles screamed, but his body, remembering years of training, reacted automatically. He pulled himself up and vaulted over the second-floor railing just as the police ran into the alley. "He's on the stairs! Call backup!" Mark ran up, taking the steps 2 at a time. The staircase hummed and shook under his weight. On the roof, the wind met him, throwing icy sleet into his face. This was the world of rooftops, a labyrinth of ventilation ducts, cables, and broken glass. Sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights began to pulse below, reflecting off wet surfaces. They were herding him like a wolf. Mark estimated the distance to the next building, about 3 meters of abyss with 5 stories of emptiness and a concrete courtyard. A running start. Boots squelched on the wet roofing felt. Push off. The second of flight felt like an eternity. He saw every raindrop frozen in the air. Impact. He landed on the edge of the adjacent roof, rolled over his shoulder to dampen the inertia, and immediately sprang to his feet. Pain in his knees was sharp, but distant. Ahead, from behind the elevator shaft housing, a shadow emerged. A cop, young, terrified, gun shaking in his hands. "Get down! On the ground! I will shoot!" Mark froze, raising his hands. Distance, 5 paces. The cop was nervous. His finger on the trigger was tense. One sharp movement and a bullet would pierce his chest. "Easy, officer." Mark's voice was hoarse. "I'm unarmed." "Get on your knees, now!" The kid's voice cracked into a falsetto. Mark began to lower himself slowly, never taking his eyes off the gun. He saw the policeman's gaze shift for a split second to his radio to report the capture. That split second was enough. Mark uncoiled forward like a spring. With his left hand, he slapped the gun barrel aside, simultaneously entering close quarters. His right hand struck hard into the crook of the policeman's elbow, instantly locking the joint and disarming him with a pain compliance hold. The gun clattered onto the roof. The cop tried to strike, but Mark was already behind him. Neck hold, a Krav Maga move, not to strangle, but to cut off blood flow to the brain. "Sorry," Mark whispered into the ear of the limp body. "You're a good kid, but I need this more." 5 seconds later, the policeman lost consciousness and slumped onto the wet tar. Mark checked his pulse. Alive, just taking a nap for a couple of minutes. He picked up the radio, yanked out the earpiece, and shoved the device into his pocket. It was his key to their movements. He kicked the gun into a far corner of the roof, into a pile of construction debris. He didn't need a weapon. Weapons create corpses, and corpses wouldn't help him. He walked to the edge of the roof. Below lay a dumpster filled with wet cardboard. 3rd floor, high but acceptable. Mark crossed himself, a gesture he hadn't made since childhood, and stepped into the void. The Seattle industrial zone at night resembled a graveyard of giants, crane skeletons, dark hulks of warehouses, broken roads. The warehouse on 4th Avenue where the IP address led him looked abandoned for 10 years. Broken windows, graffiti, boarded up doors. Mark entered through a loading bay, picking the lock with a piece of rebar. Inside smelled of dust and old wood. The beam of his pocket flashlight cut through the darkness, catching empty shelves. In the center of the vast empty hangar stood a solitary desk. On it, a laptop, glowing in the dark like an altar. Mark approached slowly, feeling the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Intuition screamed, "Run," but logic insisted, "The evidence is there." He walked up to the desk. On the laptop screen, a screensaver burned. "Press me." Mark put on gloves. Too late, he'd touched railings, doors, but at least here. He pressed the spacebar. Lights flared. Mark recoiled, shield in his eyes with his hands. When his vision returned, he realized he was standing in the center of a set. One wall of the warehouse was draped in a green chroma key screen. On the desk stood professional microphones, cameras, lighting equipment. It was a studio. A projector turned on against the opposite wall. On the huge white canvas, Mark's face appeared. It was a deep fake of such quality that Mark felt nauseous. His digital doppelganger looked into the camera with a crazed stare. "Emily, my love, chemistry is the only way to purify you. If I can't possess your beauty, no one can. Acid will bind us forever." Mark stared at it, unable to move. The horror was cold and sticky. She hadn't just framed him, she had created a digital maniac with his face. The video ended, and text appeared on the screen. "Police arrive in 3 minutes. Smile." And immediately a siren wailed, not outside, inside, loud, ear-splitting. Mark bolted for the exit, but the heavy rolling shutter doors he had entered through rumbled downwards. Automation. He was trapped. He looked around. On the desk next to the laptop stood a glass. Mark shone his flashlight. Saliva on the rim. Next to it, a hair. His hair. Emily could have taken it from a hairbrush when they lived together. She had brought his DNA here. It was a crime scene, perfectly prepared for forensics. Outside, tires screeched. Blue and red flashes danced through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. "Come out with your hands up! The building is surrounded!" Mark thought frantically. He couldn't surrender. If they found him here, amidst this equipment, with that video on the screen, it was over. Electric chair, or life without parole. He pulled a small box from his backpack, housed in an old radio case, inside which hummed high-capacity industrial capacitors, stolen from decommissioned servers. A homemade, but powerful, electromagnetic pulse generator. He'd built it to test server shielding, but now it was his only grenade. Range, 5 meters, but if connected to the power line. Mark ran to the distribution box on the wall, ripped off the cover, exposed wires sparked. He wired the contacts of his device to the main phase. "Come on, baby," he whispered. He flipped the toggle switch. The sound wasn't loud, but physically palpable, a low-frequency hum that transitioned into a sharp electrical crack, like a giant guitar string snapping. A flash of blue light illuminated the hangar, and in the same second, the world plunged into absolute darkness. The projector died, the hum of ventilation cut off. Outside, chaos reigned. Police drones hovering over the roof dropped like stones, stripped of control. Radios went silent, emitting only white static. patrol car engines stalled. Modern ECUs couldn't survive an electromagnetic strike of that magnitude. Contact, he exhaled. He didn't wait for his eyes to adjust to the dark. He knew the blueprint of the building by heart, downloaded it back at the club. In the far corner of the warehouse was a storm drain hatch. Mark felt his way to the corner, banging his knees on invisible crates. His fingers found the cold ring of the hatch. A yank. Rust resisted, but adrenaline provided strength. The heavy lid slid aside, hitting him with the stench of rotting water and mold. He jumped down just as the beams of tactical SWAT flashlights began to slice through the darkness inside the warehouse. "Clear! Sector 2! Where are the lights?" Shouts came from above. Mark was already running knee-deep in freezing sludge, ducking under the low arches of the collector. Eternal night reigned here. Rats scurried with squeaks at his footsteps. It was the path into Seattle's underworld, but it was the only way out. An hour later, Starlight Motel on the outskirts of Aurora, a place where they don't ask for ID and where stains on the carpet are best not examined under UV light. Mark sat on the edge of the sagging bed. He had washed the sewer filth off in the shower, where the water smelled of iron, and now sat in his only dry clothes, jeans and a t-shirt. He was shaking, from cold, from overexertion, from the realization of how close he had been to failure. On the small, rickety table stood his laptop, the old battle-hardened ThinkPad he always kept in a bug-out bag in a stash behind the dumpsters at work. Paranoia saved him again. He connected to the unsecured Wi-Fi of the diner next door. Mark opened the video from the parking lot.
Not the one playing on the news, cropped and heavily compressed, but the source file Emily herself had uploaded to the cloud for the police, and which had leaked to forums an hour earlier. He watched it again and again. 0014, Emily screams. 0015, liquid flies. 0017, people run. Something's wrong, he muttered. He ran a stabilization filter, then a contrast filter. Mark's gaze caught a detail on the periphery of the frame. The moment Emily falls, the phone camera momentarily captures a large puddle of oil and water on the concrete. Reflected in that puddle was what was happening behind the operator's back. There stood a car, a dark sedan, headlights off, but parking lights burning. At the moment of the attack, the car didn't move, the driver didn't get out to help, but as soon as the first witnesses ran up, the sedan slowly, without sudden movements, drove out of the frame. Mark highlighted the reflection area. "Come on, baby, show me some magic." He launched a neural network-based image reconstruction algorithm, super resolution. The pixelated mush began to take shape. First appeared the outline of the radiator grille, Honda Civic 2018 model. Then the license plate. It was mirrored and distorted by water ripples. WA445KF. The last digit was blurred. Mark opened the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles database, access to which he'd bought on a darknet auction 6 months ago. Query: Honda Civic, gray, black, plate starts WA445KF. The system thought for 3 seconds. Result: 1 match. Honda Civic, 2019. Owner: Kevin R. Miller. Address: 802 Rainier Ave S. Mark froze. Kevin. He knew that name. Kevin was the head moderator of Emily's Discord server, an admin of her fan group on Telegram, the guy who banned anyone who dared type a single word of criticism against the Queen, the one who knew her every move, the one who had no personal life other than serving her. "Accomplice," he hissed, slamming the laptop lid. Kevin's house was a depressing bungalow with an overgrown lawn and drawn curtains. The Honda stood in the driveway. Mark approached from the backyard. The door was flimsy. The lock yielded to a standard pick set in 10 seconds. Inside smelled of stale pizza, sweat, and overheated plastic. Mark walked quietly down the hall. A light burned in only one room at the end, in the basement. The sound of Emily's voice drifted from there. Mark descended the creaking stairs. What he saw made him stop for a second. It was a shrine. The basement walls were plastered with posters of Emily. On the shelves stood 3D printed figurines of her face. In the center of the room, in front of a wall of 6 monitors, sat a heavy-set guy in a stretched t-shirt in a gamer chair. Emily was on all screens, old streams, new news reports, looped gifs of her smile. Kevin was typing something with frantic speed, muttering under his breath, "We will destroy them, my queen. They will pay. All the haters will pay." Mark stepped forward and put his hand on Kevin's shoulder. The guy yelped, tried to jump up, but Mark slammed him hard back into the chair, pressing his forearm against his throat. "Quiet, Kevin. Don't wake the neighbors." "You—" Kevin's eyes widened in horror as he recognized Mark. "You're a monster, a killer. Don't touch me. I'll call the police." "You won't call the police, Kevin." Mark's voice was icy, "because then they'll have to explain what your car was doing in the parking lot at the moment of the attack." Kevin froze. His face went so pale it blended with his white t-shirt. I was just driving by." "Don't lie to me," Mark barked, increasing pressure on the throat. "I saw the video. You waited. You saw her pour it on herself. Did you take the jacket, or did you bring the acid? Speak!" Kevin started crying. They were pathetic, sobbing sounds. "She asked. She begged me." "Begged you for what?" "To save her," Kevin shouted, spraying spit. "You stalked her. You threatened her. She said you'd kill her if she didn't disappear. She needed to stage an attack so the police would finally act. I saved her life. I brought the reagents because she was afraid to buy them herself." Mark let him go, stepping back. The puzzle clicked together. Emily used this guy's obsession. She fed him a fairy tale about an evil ex to do the dirty work with someone else's hands. "You're an idiot, Kevin," Mark said quietly. "I haven't texted her in 6 months. She sent all those threats to herself." "Lies!" Kevin grabbed the mouse as if it were a weapon. "She's a saint! She showed me the messages." "Open it," Mark ordered, nodding at the monitors. "Open your private chat, right now." Kevin hesitated. "Do it, or I'll break your fingers and you'll never be able to moderate her chat again." With trembling hands, Kevin opened the secure Signal messenger on the desktop. Here, see? She writes how scared she is." Mark leaned into the screen. He started scrolling the history up. Yes, there were complaints, tears, pleas for protection, but Mark was looking for something else. A date 1 week before the attack. "Stop," he said. "What's this?" Mark pointed to a message from Emily dated last Tuesday. "Emily, Kev, sweetie, that mixture you talked about, will it definitely give a visual effect? I need the skin to turn red, but without deep scarring. If I lose my contracts with L'Oreal, I'm finished." Kevin was silent. Mark scrolled down. "Emily, 30% body surface area is perfect. Lawyers say that qualifies as grievous bodily harm. Mark will go away for 10 years, and I can launch a line of healing creams. We'll call it Phoenix. What do you think?" Mark looked at Kevin. The fan's face expressed the collapse of world. His goddess wasn't afraid of her life. She was discussing a business plan. She was bargaining over burn percentages like a discount on a sale. She used me?" Kevin whispered. His voice trembled. "But she said she loved me, that we'd be together when it was all over." "You were just a resource, Kevin, like me, like her subscribers." Mark cut him off harshly. Mark shoved Kevin away from the desk and sat in the chair. He needed these logs. This was proof, not circumstantial, but direct. Conspiracy, tampering with evidence, perjury. He inserted a flash drive into the USB port of Kevin's computer. "I'm copying everything," he said without turning. "Your chat history, files she sent you, photo metadata." "What are you going to do?" Kevin asked. He sat on the floor, hugging his knees, rocking back and forth. "I'm going to end her show," Mark replied. He ran the copy script. A green progress bar crawled to the right. Suddenly, the screen blinked. "System alert. Remote connection attempt." "Damn," Mark tensed. "Does she have remote access to your comp?" "Yeah," mumbled Kevin. "She sometimes checks how I'm working." The cursor on the screen came alive. It jerked toward the delete chat button. Emily, or someone from her team, had noticed the activity. Mark intercepted control of the mouse, entering a digital struggle for the cursor. "Not today, bitch," he growled. He yanked the network cable from the system unit. The internet vanished, but the local copy remained. Copying to the flash drive completed. Mark pulled the drive. Then he quickly typed a command in the terminal, creating an encrypted archive. He took a 4G modem, his backup channel, from his pocket and connected it to the laptop. "I'm uploading this to the cloud," he said to the empty room, "to a server she can't reach." He set a timer. Dead man switch activated. Time to auto-publish 2000. "If I don't enter the cancellation code in 20 minutes, these files go to every news agency, the FBI, and Reddit." Mark turned to Kevin. "You have a choice, Kev. Stay here and go down as an accomplice, or disappear and be a witness for the prosecution. Decide now." Kevin raised tear-stained eyes. There was no more adoration in them. There was the rage of a betrayed fanatic. And there is no one scarier than a fan disillusioned with their idol. "She's in the penthouse in Skyline Tower. Code for the servant's back entrance is 7749. Security on the ground floor and by the elevator, but I know a bug in the courier pass system." Mark nodded. "Thanks, Kevin." He pulled up his hood and walked out of the basement into the rainy night. He had 20 minutes to get to the tower and look Emily in the eyes before the truth blew up the internet. The rain over Seattle changed its rhythm. If at the beginning of the night it was chaotic jazz, now it had turned into heavy, monotone industrial. Water streamed down the mirrored facade of Skyline Tower in a solid sheet, distorting the city lights into abstract smears. Here, at cloud level, the air was thin and cold, but below, at the main entrance, chaos reigned. Patrol cars with flashing lights blocked the perimeter. Reporters huddled under umbrellas, waiting for any comment from the police. No one paid attention to the courier from Swift Logistics in a yellow raincoat and cap pulled low over his eyes. He passed through the side service entrance, pushing a cart with boxes. Mark felt his skin itching under the wet fabric of the raincoat. Adrenaline mixed with fatigue created a cocktail that made his hands shake, but his mind was crystal clear. He approached the freight elevator. The guard, bored behind the counter, didn't even look up from his tablet. "Delivery for 4002, urgent," Mark grunted, copying the intonations of thousands of faceless workers in this city. "Leave it here," the guard replied lazily. "Protocol Platinum, hand-to-hand only, or I call your shift supervisor and say you delayed Miss Emily's medication." Mentioning the name of the saintly martyr worked like a magic spell. The guard grimaced, but waved his hand and tapped his badge against the elevator reader. "Beat it. You got 3 minutes." The polished steel doors closed, cutting off the noise of the outside world. Mark was alone in the mirrored box. He immediately shed the yellow raincoat, remaining in a black hoodie and tactical pants. From an inner pocket, he took a small device, a jammer he'd assembled at the club from old phone parts. He stuck it to the surveillance camera panel in the corner of the elevator. The red LED on the camera blinked and died. Numbers on the display changed. 10, 20, 30. Mark took out the smartphone he'd borrowed from Kevin, connected to the building's Wi-Fi network using a password fished from Kevin's router logs.
Access granted. He needed to intercept elevator control. Emily's penthouse had a separate access code he didn't have. But Otis elevators of this series had a service vulnerability. If you switched the cab to fire service mode, it automatically went to the top floor to evacuate VIPs. Mark entered the command in the phone terminal. The elevator jerked. The lights inside flickered. Floor 55. Penthouse. The doors opened with a soft chime. Mark stepped into a corridor lined with white marble. It smelled of lilies and expensive antiseptic. The silence was absolute, cotton-like. He knew private security sat in a monitor room on the ground floor, relying on cameras, but the cameras were now broadcasting a looped image of an empty corridor, another gift from Mark's algorithms injected into the building network 5 minutes ago. He approached double doors of frosted glass. The lock was biometric. Mark took out Scotch tape and a jar of printer toner from that same courier cart. He applied powder to the panel, blew off the excess. A greasy thumbprint appeared on the glass, likely the courier who brought food an hour ago, or Emily herself. 1 in a million chance. He placed the pad of his finger over the print, using a special silicone film to fool the capacitive scanner. Beep. Green light. The door slid silently aside. The penthouse was a masterpiece of minimalism, a huge space where there were almost no walls, only floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows, behind which the rain wept. The city lay below, spread out and submissive, like a microchip map. Emily stood by the window, back to him. She wore a pearl-colored silk robe. In one hand she held a glass of red wine. The other touched her neck, hidden under an elegant bandage. She didn't turn around when he entered. "You took a long time, Kevin," she said. Her voice was calm, commanding. "I hope you brought the hard drive. I want to make sure you deleted the source files." Mark took a step forward. His boots squeaked on the parquet. "Kevin isn't coming, Em. He's busy, rethinking his life priorities." Emily froze, her shoulders tensed, but she didn't flinch. Slowly, with the grace of a predator, she turned around. In the semi-darkness of the room, her face looked like a porcelain mask. Her eyes glinted with cold. "Mark." She took a sip of wine, as if greeting an old friend at a party. "I knew you were smart, but I didn't think you were stupid enough to come here." "I came to collect a debt." Mark stopped 5 meters from her. He kept his eyes on her, scanning the space. On a low table next to her lay a gun, a compact Glock 43. Emily laughed. It wasn't the weeping sound millions heard on streams. It was a low, guttural laugh. "Debt? You don't owe me anything, honey. You've already done everything needed. You became the perfect villain. Do you know how many pre-orders my Phoenix Cosmetics line has in the last 3 hours? People love recovery stories. They need a monster to love the victim." She took a step toward the table, casually placing the glass next to the gun. "Why, Em?" Mark asked. "We broke up a year ago. Why destroy me?" "Because you were convenient," she shrugged. "You're an introvert, a techie, a little weird. Perfect profile for a stalker. No one was surprised. And me, I needed a rebirth. A modeling career ends at 25, but a career as an icon of struggle just begins. The scar on my neck, that's my new brand. It's worth more than perfect skin." She touched the bandage. "Want to see? It's the work of a master."
A chemical peel raised to an art form. "You're sick," Mark said quietly. "I'm effective," she cut him off. "And you are a dead man. Security will be here in a minute. They'll find you with a gun in your hand. They'll say you broke in to finish what you started. I'll shoot you in self-defense. The perfect finale." She reached for the gun. "Don't rush." Mark unzipped his hoodie. Underneath on his chest hung a smartphone, lens facing out. Next to it blinked the red indicator of an external battery pack. Emily frowned. "You're recording? You think the police will believe your phone? They'll decide it's another deepfake." "This isn't a recording, Emily." Mark smiled, but the smile came out terrifying, like a skull's grin. "This is a live stream." He raised his left hand, holding a remote control. "I hacked the Clear Channel ad agency server 15 minutes ago. Right now, your face, your voice, and this confession are not being broadcast to the police. They are going to the main screen in Times Square in New York, to the screens of Piccadilly Circus in London, and to that huge billboard opposite your window in Seattle." Emily jerked her head toward the window. Through the rain and darkness, on the neighboring skyscraper, a giant screen burned. Usually there was a Coca-Cola ad. Now there was her face, shot from the angle of Mark's chest. On a gigantic scale, she drank wine and smiled her cynical smile. The sound couldn't be heard through the glass, but she read her own lips on the screen. They need a monster to love the victim. Emily's face changed. The porcelain doll mask cracked. Her true face was twisted with animal terror and rage. "Turn it off," she shrieked. "Turn it off right now!" "Can't." Mark shook his head. "The stream is decentralized. It's going through a torrent stream. 3 million people are watching right now. Your brand is dead, Emily." "I'll kill you!" Emily grabbed the gun. The movement was sharp, panicked. Mark lunged at her. Bang! The bullet shattered the panoramic window. The glass spiderwebbed but didn't fall. The sound of the shot deafened them both. Mark crashed into her, knocking her off her feet. The gun skittered away, sliding across the parquet. They fell. Emily fought like a wildcat. She dug her nails into his face, trying to claw his eyes out. "Bastard! You ruined everything!" she screamed. Mark blocked the blows, using Krav Maga skills, but he held back. He didn't hit her, he just held her. "Look at the camera," he wheezed, trying to turn his body so the lens on his chest captured her face distorted with malice. "Let them see the real you!" Emily found a shard of the broken wine glass on the floor. A sharp swing. Mark felt a searing pain burn his forearm. Blood sprayed onto the white marble tiles. He intercepted her hand, twisting the wrist. The glass dropped. He pressed his weight down on her, pinning her arms to the floor with his knees. "It's over. Enough!" Emily thrashed beneath him, spewing curses, her face red, veins on her neck bulging. The bandage slipped, revealing the burn, red, inflamed, but far from as horrifying as in the media photos. At that moment, the penthouse doors exploded. The shockwave blew out the remaining glass. A flashbang grenade rolled into the center of the room. Flash! A ringing in his ears drowned out all thought. The world turned white. Through the haze, Mark heard the stomp of dozens of feet. "Target acquired. Male on top. He's strangling her," the shout of the assault team leader.
Mark tried to raise his hands, tried to yell, "I'm unarmed," but his tongue wouldn't obey. He was disoriented. He was still looming over Emily, holding her down. For the SWAT team bursting into the smoke and chaos, the picture was unambiguous. A crazed stalker finishing off his victim. Contact! Fire! Mark felt the blow of a sledgehammer to his chest. 1, 2, 3. They weren't live rounds, but kinetic rubber bullets at close range broke ribs like dried twigs. The air was knocked out of his lungs. Next, the taser hit. 2 barbs embedded in his shoulder and stomach. 50,000 volts coursed through his body, turning muscles to stone. The pain was blinding, absolute. Mark collapsed onto his side, convulsively gasping for air. His body seized in convulsions. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness were the boots of SWAT officers surrounding Emily. One of the fighters was helping her up, covering her shoulders with his flak jacket. Emily was crying. She was crying perfectly again. She pointed a trembling finger at Mark and said something. The phone screen on Mark's chest was shattered by one of the bullets. The broadcast cut off. Darkness. 2 weeks later, prison ward of Harborview Medical Center. Sterility here didn't smell of lilies, but of bleach and hopelessness. Mark lay on the bunk. His right hand was cuffed to the metal rail. His chest was tightly bandaged, 3 broken ribs. The taser burn on his shoulder was still healing. The door opened with a heavy clank. His public defender entered, a tired man with a gray face and a cheap briefcase. He sat on the chair without taking off his coat. "Well?" Mark asked. His voice was raspy, like an ungreased hinge. "Did they see the video?" The lawyer sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mark, the situation is complicated." "What the hell do you mean, complicated?" Mark tried to sit up, but the pain in his ribs threw him back onto the pillow. I broadcast her confession to Times Square. Millions saw it. They saw a video, yes, the lawyer nodded. But Emily's defense, they hired the best experts. They claim the broadcast was fabricated. What? Mark froze. Their version is this. You, a talented hacker and neural network specialist, hacked the billboards and launched a pre-prepared deepfake. They say you used real-time face generation technology. The fact that you worked with sound and video in the past plays against you. They found voice models on your server, the one you used for backup, the exact one she used. But proving you didn't make them is almost impossible. Mark stared at the ceiling, white with a lightning-shaped crack. But I was there. I was holding the camera. There is no recording on the camera. The memory chip was destroyed by the bullet. Only the intercepted stream signal remains, which experts are calling a high-class digital forgery.
The lawyer took out a tablet. You're facing 15 to 20 years, federal-level hacking, assault with intent to kill, cyber terrorism. The DA is offering a deal. Plead guilty in exchange for 12 years. Mark was silent. Look, the lawyer placed the tablet in front of him. This is from this morning. On the screen was a photo from Instagram. Emily. She stood on the balcony of the same penthouse. The sun, rare for Seattle, illuminated her face. A thin, neat scar was visible on her neck like a pink thread. She looked majestic, not a victim, but a warrior. Likes 4.5 million. Caption under the photo. Truth isn't what hackers show you on screens. Truth is what you feel with your heart. They tried to break me physically and digitally, but I am still here, and I am stronger than ever. Thank you for believing in me, not machines. #Survivor, Phoenix Rising. Mark looked at the photo. He zoomed in on her face. Emily's eyes, blue, deep, but absolutely empty. There was no triumph in them, no joy. There was the icy abyss of a person who had killed everything human inside herself for the sake of engagement. She had won, but she had become a prisoner of her own lie. Now she would have to play this role every day, every minute, for the rest of her life. One wrong step, one forgotten detail, and they would tear her apart. Mark began to laugh. At first it was a quiet wheeze, then his shoulders began to shake. "Mark, are you okay?" The lawyer pulled away in fright. Mark laughed, loudly, hysterically, to the point of tears, to the point of pain in his broken ribs. The laughter echoed off the tiled walls of the prison ward, carrying eerily down the corridor. He had lost the battle for freedom, but he knew something millions of her subscribers didn't. He hadn't created a monster. He had created a prison for her, from which there is no escape, and the keys to that prison had drowned in the flow of information. The camera slowly pulls back from the laughing man, chained to the bed, flies through the barred window, rises higher, above the rain, above the city, dissolving into the gray Seattle sky, where truth no longer matters.